All right. Rada, welcome to the Monkey Dance Podcast. This is Ohan, and I'm sitting here with Nicolas.
And Sven.
And Sven. And so, yeah, Nicolas, do you want to tell us who you are and what you do?
Yes, so I'm Nicolas Goupil. I'm working at the Center for Early Cognition of the University of Copenhagen as a postdoc. I'm working with Dora Campish on a project which is on the emergence of memory in the young children. A project she produced, she got financed, I think 2 years, 1 year and a half before now. And yeah, I think the question she's asking is just, to put it simply, how infants' early understanding of other people's perspective may come together with remembering other aspects of the world, or like some aspects of the world they already see, but differently, so some transformation of memory. Mm-hmm. And I guess what's very important to this program is really this keyword of perspective taking, because, yeah, the interface between memory of the self and the other in her program is really like how you can switch from perspective and see the things differently based on what you see in person and what another person tells you, and how do you deal with both.
Right.
And yeah, I just love the project. When I read about it, I was like, this is the thing I want to do. So I just like applied to nothing else but this one thing. I was really motivated to do it, because like in research, it's not always the case that you end up like, yeah, how to say that, asking a question that you can explain to anyone and that you can talk about at every level of thinking, whether it's like lay words, technical words, computational thinking, philosophical thinking. Like you can talk about memory in every way, and you can talk about the children's memory like in many ways, except the one we still need to figure.
So do you want to walk us through like the methods you're using? You're experimenting this with infants and young children, but do you want to walk us through the methods, and then maybe even through step-by-step the layers of explanation that you use for, like, in terms of lay language, and then philosophically, maybe computationally even?
Let's see how far I can go without any paper written. So there is a lot of thinking that would be extremely sketchy in what I might tell, but I can give basics of the method, to start with.
Yeah.
So it's a longitudinal study.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the most important aspect of that. So by that I mean like we hired families when the kids were 12 months, and we will see them again. We saw them again when they were 18 months, and we will see them again at 30 and 36 months. And that allows us to, at each age, run a batch of experiments, see how they perform in these different experiments, what's at the population level is happening at this age. But then we can also compare the age, and within the different age, we can take the same individual and see how that child who was like this at this age becomes like this at this other age, and how now, not at the population level, but at a sub-population level, you might see some sort of organization of the mind. So I guess that's a big thing about what we're doing here. And then about the rest of the testing, it's almost anything we could think of doing with kids. We've been super excited about it, so a bit ambitious. And we do screen-based experiments, so you show videos, images to the kids, and you record where they look. We've done free play, like we are here, so you have a child and you have a parent, and they just play together, or just the child, or they read a book. Many cute things like that. I think the cutest is like they have a little conversation with the, it's really memory. It's like we ask the parents, can you tell us, and we're gonna be behind the curtains, but can you tell your child something about the past weeks, days, or months that you think he would remember? And then they start saying, and you know, at 18 months, it's not like they can really talk, but they can say more, like their grandmother, you know.
Yeah.
And they will just like pick up one word and be like, yes, more. Ball, the ball. Ball. So it's very cute. And yeah, we do also some neuroimaging. It's a bit off scope,
Right.
but we did NIRS. And
Oh, you did NIRS as well?
Yeah.
Ah, okay. Was that the primary? Did you do EEG as well?
No EEG.
Oh, okay.
But,
I didn't realize that.
No, but because
Cool.
it was not a big part of the project.
Okay.
Initially, the main thing is that it's longitudinal.
Yeah.
But then, I mean, Dora, she had this idea. It's like, okay, so you have a developmental network. In adults, it seems to be related to memory.
Yeah, nice.
And when we took a look at a review of that, it's like the first keyword of every brain networks involved in that network in terms of what experiments, what cognitive processes are tackled is autobiographical memory.
Yeah, sure.
And then
Sure.
there are some evidence you have this in kids. So
Right.
we thought let's record that.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
That's really cool.
it's really hard.
Yeah, I bet. I
to
bet.
do.
So have you analyzed the at 12 and 18 months? Do you have some longitudinal data ready?
Yeah, actually, just this afternoon.
Oh, that's what you were working on. Oh, amazing. Okay.
Yeah, but that's the thing that I was telling you about. Like,
Yeah.
I have something, I see something in the data, but it's like,
Difficult to tease apart.
yeah.
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 So, why don't you give me like what you expect to be going on? And it doesn't have to be like formally or what would have to be in the paper, but you can even just extrapolate. Yeah.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a tough question because like the thing is we have so many experiments measuring more or less the same things, but you know, like you could imagine 2 experiments recording exactly one cognitive process and still find super discrepant results. So I can only tell you at a certain level of abstraction, I would say.
Yeah.
And I guess so. It's a bit difficult for me to tell you Dora's hypothesis, but I think I will try because that's her
Sure.
project.
Yeah. Of course. Yeah. Of course.
So you have perspective taking. You have you need different. How to say? Okay, so at 12 months until 18 months, infants switch from being in an alter-centric viewpoint. That's the thing they have proposed in this center, actually. The main theory developed in these walls, that kids, when they are around 1 year, before 1 year, they are just biased towards someone else's perspective. If you interview Velisa, he will give you a much better explanation. And they move from that, from being able to have their own perspective on the world, because a sense of the self emerges. And at the moment they have a self, then they have their own perspective. They have a perspective of another person. They need to deal with both things. And because they have to deal with that, they start to have a challenge which is precisely remembering from where, on whom they know something. And I guess that's Dora's main proposal is that at the moment they need to remember that, the memory transforms to become able to track these pieces of information. So yeah, I think that's the main idea. On my end, how to say, I think I'm much less specific in the theory. It's a bit more broad. It's more like the idea is that you have some input. So it's mostly based on what parents are saying in the lab. So they say 2 things. First thing is that they have their own memory, like their first memory. And they are like, I'm not sure I do remember that. Maybe my parents told me, and now I built the memory.
Sure, yeah.
So that's one version. So your first memory is something you build. And then you have the parents who also have older kids and the one who come here and observe that for their 3-year-olds sometimes remember things they have no idea of. They are like discovering that their child remembers things they don't remember themselves, and it's really this sentence they have is like, I don't know where this comes from. I don't know where he has this from or she has this from.
Right.
And so it seems that you have on this end, mechanism of memory which just build up And then at some point, kids start to really remember events of their life, and no one expects them to be able to do that. And you have this other thing that, you know, to start remembering an event, and here I get closer to what Dora says, you need to have like people, like you need to extract the most important information and to associate it, to understand what are the associations between these things. And probably the parents are very helpful for that. Maybe they support. So while you are sitting somewhere, they say, look at this, all these joint attention mechanism. And then, so the child just gets a better view of everything. They have like their own perspective of the other person. That's just more information if you want. And then later on, they just discuss that with their parents, or rather their parent discuss that with them. They're like, oh, do you remember yesterday? Went to the zoo and you saw the elephant? And the child is like, wow. and that's,
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you have this trend in development, at least the theory that's being put forward from this department, basically, from this set of labs, is that before you have the ability to individuate, understand that you have your own perspective, you are constantly taking the perspective of others, but not really thinking about it as a self-other at all. It's just that that's the most salient information in your environment, is what other conspecifics, other human beings are behaving in.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then at some point you start to individuate, you have some internal experience that you become slowly slightly more aware of, and then there's almost some kind of conflict between your internal perspective and the perspective taking of others. And then you try to reconcile that by having the other not be a monolith, but having actually attributing behavior to other agents in the environment specific to them, and then especially behaviors and thoughts specific to you. And so at some point you can even say, you went to the zoo, how do you think the elephant felt in the sun or something? And then the child could actually say something about it.
Yeah.
Right, okay,
Yeah, I mean, on the later part of the explanation, it moves a bit, it moves on with the theory, I think, like, I don't know what's the talks are here, but I think, indeed, like this is this idea that when you get older, you start to be a bit more on track, you start to track your own views on the world, but it's a bit difficult to know, like, I guess where I start to doubt is the question of conflict. There are a lot of cases that where perspectives don't conflict, and we are interested in the moment where they conflict because it's where we can operationalize the difference between the self and the other. It's kind of a limit of the method we have. And in all these theory of mind experiments, in all these theories actually, not necessarily theory of mind per se, but what's happening when children see another person looking at something, how they start to think about what this person thinks, what this person wants, or this type of things. I lost the point. Yes, in all this testing, there is a blind spot, which is the most obvious thing, which is like, what is a true belief? What is it when all the perspective align? Is it just like an integration? Is there one that prevails? Is there one that is cancelled? And like, what is actually the true belief of a child without anyone else? You know, like you have experiments about memory, for instance. But it's not clear in my mind how these things are reconciled.
What do you mean by true belief in this case?
Sorry, it's a bit technical. It's like, so, the idea of studying a belief, to prove it's a belief, it has to be something which is not necessarily in the real world. And so when it's in the real world, you can't tell apart whether it's a belief or a fact, something that someone represents directly.
Yes.
But when it happens that the belief is different from the reality, then you know it's a belief because obviously that's not there.
Yep.
And what I was talking about, like what I think is very difficult to operationalize, and our blind spot in this theory is what happens when the belief matches the reality. You have some measurements of confidence as well, this type of thing, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Yeah, you have, so you're focused on the incongruence between what is believed and then what is perceived or
Yeah.
what others perceive? So like, does it matter that there's a conflict internally, or is there just conflict objectively, sort of separate from the child?
I mean, like in the paradigm, usually you test the child's understanding of another person, so it's about that
Okay.
person's belief and the fact.
Okay,
But
yeah, yeah,
yes,
that's
indeed, there you don't know what the child is actually believing. Well, you know that the child believes nothing when the child is following what the other person thinks.
Right.
And then you can imagine maybe scenarios where you, but yeah, that's the thing, like when you have a child directly seeing the fact, then you don't know whether it's about the child's belief or the fact you observe.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm kind of new to the field, so probably there is more than when I know what I know, but yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So air monitoring then is not necessarily like a major component of what's going on. You're looking at behavior in light of what you might call a fact, like the truth of the matter.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. So when and so just to cycle back to one thing, the interesting thing about perspective taking is like the fact that we can do it. There's a little bit of effort, but it doesn't take too much effort to take perspective, and how it doesn't, unless you are suffering from some kind of psychiatric disorder, you don't have a problem of automatic perspective taking. Like, I'm not struggling to take your perspective in this moment. Like, I don't imagine automatically that Sven is on my left and that the camera is on my but the interesting thing is I can if I want. Like, so if I look at you, I can, without even closing my eyes, imagine that I'm sitting on the opposite side of the table. Now Sven and the camera are on my left. That's something that I have the capacity to do, but I don't struggle to not do it. And so it's this interesting thing where it doesn't take too much effort, but it's not automatic in a way that is problematic.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
I mean, like, there's one thing is like this mental imagery, mental experiment that like this imagery mental experiment that you described is not necessarily what the youngest kids are doing. Because like you said a bit earlier, it's more about what is relevant in the environment. I think Velisa has a perfect illustration of that when he shows like an array. You have one person, you have two objects, and then the person looks at one object, and he creates a heat map, as in eye tracking, where blue is where you have like no saliency, no informational drive or bias, and red is where it turns to be interesting and informative, and you can predict quite precisely that the children are computing this saliency map based on how another person is looking. But now I guess like that kind of directs us to one of the big questions we are a bit struggling in the lab, is like how much do the infants bind the information, like the heat map, the object that is more salient based on another person's perspective, and that person. Like, how do they just encode that this object is cool, or do they remember like this object belongs or relates in some way to someone? And it's not even clear whether they know precisely who that is. Like Dora, she has some findings that show that babies, they remember that someone liked something, but they don't remember who exactly. And if they see someone new go in the room, and they will be surprised that that person doesn't prefer the same thing as the other one.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's quite unspecific, quite object-centered.
Yeah.
And it's not about like me imagining being in your skin necessarily.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so because I think the most useful thing is object-oriented, especially for a young child.
Yeah.
It's better to know what's safe, what's edible, what's, rather than who prefers what. And that's more of a higher order social phenomenon, as opposed to sort of operating more out of need. People tend to avoid this or approach this is more important than this individual avoids this or approaches this. And I'd rather not encode on an individual basis if I'm trying to learn about how to engage with my environment or a novel environment.
Yeah, I think that's the main hypothesis behind that, because like they have this idea that infants move from generalizable knowledge to something which is a bit more specific, and that drives toward encoding the source of information, for instance. And that's where it gets super interesting for the project that we are doing. Is so we are like investigating episodic memory of in fact, to be more precise. It's like it's not any type of memory in children's mind, because they remember everything. Like they remember a lot of things. Sorry, they remember things which are statistically regular. It's like that's how they learn language. They know categories of objects. They know what's big, what's small, what's animate and inanimate. First thing. And they know what else, like semantic links. Like if you see, it's kind of tightly related to statistical regularity. But if I say sea, you might think boat, so you might think wave, and there is like a corpus of items like this. But this is not what we are interested in. We are interested in that one system of memory, which is isolating associations between things that are somewhat arbitrary. And by this I mean, like, I don't know your first memory, but so maybe you have one to share, actually, because it would be a test of
oh no, okay. I would have to think, actually. I can't think of what my earliest memory is. Yeah.
It's a bit personal.
No. I wish I had it available. And it's also, like you said, difficult to tease apart. There are things that I know about myself before I have the capacity to remember. And there's some things that are on the border probably, but I'm not sure if I remember it or not. But I think, actually, all right, see, like, okay. The earliest memory that I have is in the cot that I used to sleep in my grandparents' house. Actually, that is kind of consistently one of the earliest memories, because I wasn't in a bed yet. I was in, like a thing with 4, like, soft walls that you can see through, and I was in it. And yeah, I don't know how long I slept in there, maybe until 3, 4, something like that, just out of convenience. But maybe that's the earliest memory that I can say that I have. At night in there,
At night. Yeah, perfect. That's one piece of information that helps with demonstration.
Okay, cool.
Because it's kind of like, how to say, okay, you might have a statistical regularity between being in a bed and the time of the day being night.
That's the other.
So, well, you remember this object, you remember the night, you remember it's your grandparents' house, and it's kind of, it's a pieces of information which might not relate in a statistical way. For instance, your grandparents on the night, there is no special link between these two types of information. You don't see them only during the night. There is no semantic information, unless indeed you see them only the night, or they have something. Or there are there is no specific semantic link.
And this happened very often. I mean, this is where we spend most of our childhood. So
yeah. But I mean, what I mean is, like, you slept at other places as well.
Of course.
In your whole life, being in at sleep somewhere does not relate to being at your grandparents'
and it's not
place.
a novel single event.
Exactly.
Right.
So. Whatever, there's something about novelty, but what I meant was, like, this type of association, they just happen because you've been living that event. It's kind of a signature of, it's not a general knowledge, it's very specific in your life, about your life.
Yes.
And so I guess that's one way to separate episodic memory system, or like the type of associations you have in the episodic memory system, from the other types of memory system. And
I see. And so do early memories often follow this pattern? Or do people remember, like, single episodic events very often as their first memory?
So it's more at a conceptual level. So it's not necessarily about what is the first memory of anyone, but it's like
Sure.
if I take an episode of your life, like the first one is a salient one, you would you will characterize this this type of remembering that way. So to make it clear, if I tell you to remember, like if it's about remembering what happens when an apple falls from a tree,
Yeah.
it goes down. It's like it's some principle of a world, some causal event that you encode, which is another type of system that infants are very fast on learning. That they learn very fast.
Right.
But it's not about like it's.
You
not
mean
about
like in intuitive physics or something?
Yes.
Like,
yes.
yeah.
But this system of intuitive physics, it's not about like having seen every single item of the wall falling.
Right.
It's like a system which allows them to generalize things they have never seen.
Mm-hmm.
But the type of memory that builds an episodic event are something which is not inferred based on the law of causality, for instance, as well. So it's like statistical regularity, semantic causality, all this they can do very early, from the first month of life, maybe even earlier, I don't know.
Sure.
Yeah. But remembering specific events in high resolution, that's another way of describing these things, because like you provided a lot of information about that one memory you had, and that's a richness of features which makes this event quite unique. And
Yeah, I see what you mean. So how does that can you tie that back into exact like what you're looking for?
Why are you doing this? So when I was telling you about what the parents say, I told you that sometimes kids remember stuff out of nowhere. And I think that's because this system is starting to work somehow. They start to associate very plethora of information together, and that creates events, and then they can tell about it. But that's, by the way, another part of episodic memory. Is like it's not just about associating things into one memory. It's also about being capable of talking about it, travel back in time, developing about what you remember. And that's kind of the mechanism, the early, the associative mechanism. That's part of what we are today. So before you even have any social input, you might have some memory system at work, and whether this memory system develops because of some social input or in concert or like coincidentally, we actually don't know. So that's kind of what we wanted to investigate. But the initial part of the project was really about perspective and the conflict between perspective. That other part of the project on memory binding, it's kind of an input. It's something. So when we were developing the project before we started, we just had this idea that maybe there's this memory system already there, and we should maybe look at what's happening there, because maybe like just to control what we find in the other task is not just like memory development of memory, there is a social component to it. That was one way to see it, but at some point I just realized that this was actually the question somehow. Well, to me it's like one core to the question. It's not just about controlling that the system mechanism of binding in social contexts are really about social information. It's more about like what's the memory system, what is the memory system, how does it transform, and what do we start from.
Nice. So, okay, cool. So how did you get to this point in your research? So I guess before joining this exact project, which you've been on since like what, September of 24? Okay, yeah. And so what were you doing before the project?
I was doing visual perception.
Okay, nice.
I was working with Liuba Papeo, Jean-Rémy Hockman at the Institut des Sciences Cognitives, Marc Jeanneroda, in Lyon, in France. And the thesis, it was my thesis, was that we humans, or rather like vision in general, primate vision, has developed through evolution a specific mechanism, a mechanism that is specific to spatial relationships between people to detect them, represent them faster, and doing that by grouping them into one unit.
Huh.
So that's, I think that's how I would
That's
summarize it.
interesting. Yeah. So like if you and Sven are hanging out a lot, I would group you and Sven as a
Yeah.
unit.
If we look at each other,
Yeah.
But if we look away from each other, then nope.
That's interesting.
And if he looks at me and I look some other way,
Still,
it's unclear.
it's because that could be a relationship.
Yeah, a unidirectional one.
Yeah.
Kids actually, they tend to, 6 months, they do group people who look like this into one unit the same way they do it when the people look at each other. But when you look at data with adults in the various paradigm that Luba on other PhD students and postdocs did, like it's a bit more unclear. It's a bit, So the big thing is, let's say, about what she calls facingness.
Okay.
So it's the fact that we face each other. Yeah. And so, but I mean, like, just to tell you what's super cool in her theory is like, so you've had a lot of people trying to say vision is encapsulated, it's perception, there is nothing from the rest of the mind that influences what's happening there. And then you had people saying, yeah, no, look, when I'm at the bottom of a hill and it's very steep, then I tend to see it higher, you know.
Yeah.
And there was back and forth. At some point, it happened to, like, people started to see that vision is, indeed quite encapsulated. There are a bunch of stuff that changes what's happening there. But it's not like what's the very, very encapsulated mechanisms. I'm not even sure I should say encapsulated, but the rather fast and automatic, I think it's a better way to call them. The fast and automatic mechanisms, they do have some specialization for information of social nature mostly. So there is something which is about a higher level of knowledge, or like something which is not just reconstructing images based on visual features, but selecting what features to put together, which is functioning. Which is changing these mechanisms. And you have huge research on face perception that shows that, two dots on one dot, like a face, it just catches your attention, catches the neonatal attention. It's like, it's the one thing. And Luba, she just said, like, okay, but what about facingness? Like, what about social interactions? Because, you know, detecting someone's face, someone's body actually as well, it's also one thing. It's interesting, but you also need to track social interactions. You need to catch them super rapidly, because like obviously it's going to help you to survive in the social world. And she found out that this was the case with very, very smart and precise experiments on visual perception, and we just follow up on that. But it's cool, So, sorry, just to make clear what I try to say is like, her discovery is that very fast and automatic mechanism of perception, which we thought were just about reconstructing images, they can still pick up on very high sort of level types of relationships, which are the one which can cue social interaction, like people facing each other.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. It makes sense why also that would be necessary. Right, like why that would be really, or not necessary, but why that would be really useful to be able to do.
Yeah.
So, can you also then guide me through what is driving you towards cognition in general?
It's a bumpy road. How to say?
Yeah. You can answer that, I guess, in whatever way. Yeah. Like, yeah.
It's like, I mean, it's two things. Like, it's both an accident and something that had to happen. I don't know how to say. So it's an accident because like we've been discussing a lot about thinkers like Frantz Fanon, Aimé Césaire, and like these guys. I also read from Max Weber about the ethic of the Protestant ethic and all these things, because I was very and read a lot about how he described how moral values can shape within individuals can shape society, and I was like, cool. Well, I have an interest in sociology, but I would like to see how it's working at the psychological level. Like, what's the building block, and then it was just about social cognition. And I worked with Olivier Mascaro in the Institute.
Oh, yeah.
Very cool to work with him. And we also did super nice works with advanced representation and of social relationships, which like it was literally the finding we were doing. We were just aligning with a poem by Khalil Gibran. I don't know if I pronounce well.
Yeah, Khalil Gibran.
And which is about like the throne we have in our mind. It's like if you want to overthrow the tyrant, you need to first destroy the throne you have in your mind. And we are just finding that, okay, at 14 months, they have a giant throne in their mind for the dominant ones. And I found it super cool. But then, you know, like you are a master student and you just look around who's got money to finance your PhD or at least get you as a research engineer, because I wanted to do research, but like, you know, not necessarily a PhD. And Luba had this grant, ERC grant for her project. And I knew her project. I saw people presenting that. I was like, oh, that's cool. It's social perception. Yeah, it relates to social cognition somehow.
Yeah.
And then we were right there. And then I just realized I knew nothing. Like literally, I just like started to work with her. I started to read the literature she was recommending, and I was just like seeing like, okay, but I don't know what is the mind. I don't know like a single thing about cognitive sciences. I don't know nothing about neuroscience. And these things that I was not really interested in the first place, they happen to be super cool. And also, it's like at some point you get to work. I mean, it was either going a research engineer with Luba Pape or working in a call center. So. So you go for the cool job.
Yeah,
and, but I mean, there was also scientific curiosity in that.
Yeah, clearly.
So that's why I write there. But then, you know, like after I was done with my PhD, I started to reflect on what was my first motivation and also what was left. Because at the end of my chapter with Luba, of my thesis and the last work we did together, we arrived at something happened at 3, 4, 5 years. Over the course of years, the visual mechanism we were investigating started to transform in a way which was not very clear, and I started to be back to my question of what's happening after you move beyond the visual perception to the social information. How does it influence the kids and so. And then I saw Dora's project. I read it, and it was like literally that. It's like a lot of experiments were screen-based, so starting from visual perception, but then it's all about understanding of people's minds, mechanism of memory, and I have to say like that in some ways episodic memory are extremely relevant to this question of Max Weber. Like this question of how societies are built based off inner representation. So it's not necessarily moral things, but it can be questions of identity, which is quite hot topic lately. And episodic memory, or maybe identity, is all about episodic memory.
Yep.
So maybe I'll get back to what I wanted to do.
That's really funny. So so you know, I had like 10 years in between undergrad and masters, and the reason why I went into cognitive science is because I felt it was low level enough to investigate what I saw as like the most crucial sort of mechanism guiding society, which is identity. And and so I found a memory researcher because I was like, if the memory goes, what's left of the identity, you know?
Yeah.
And so that's actually where I started.
That's super cool.
Yeah, with an amazing memory researcher, Aisha Jambo-Durol. She's like, now also a collaborator and just a great mentor. She's a really amazing scientist. But And
what did you find? Did you get some project to work on?
yeah. So I did my master's thesis under her. So it was cool. It was a dual master's program. So you had to, in 3 years, you would finish a master's in 2 different departments. True interdisciplinary cognitive science, and it was, I did it in the philosophy department and then in the cognitive psych. And so in philosophy, I was working on epistemics because it's like, okay, what is, I guess I see, I mentioned this, I think, on the podcast a couple of times even, but like I was sitting down with her once and it was early on when we were just like, doing that thing where you're getting to know each other with your advisor, so you sit down and have coffee and long conversations. And like it was a month into many conversations, 2 months in, and I realized I never asked her what memory is. And so I was like, so I told her that. I was like, what is memory? And her response was just one word. She said, memory is mutable. And everything else you have to construct around, but this idea of the mutability of memory, that it's in here, that whether or not we talk about a world of facts, there is an internal world that is guiding the memory, that is guiding the identity of the individual, that is the episodic memory of the individual. We can have 2 episodic memories about what we think is the same event and have 2 completely different constructions of it. And so this kind of led me down this road of, okay, well, actually, if I'm trying to understand memory, I have identity. I thought I had to go through memory, but I think memory is all beliefs. Like maybe not explicit beliefs, but something at the level of priors that the individual maintains, right? That come up and bubble up as I can formulate it as a sentence, as a belief. I can propositionally say this, maybe not before thinking about it or being forced, but once I'm pushed, I can form the proposition from the belief. And so that's why I started focusing on beliefs, and then the entire master's thesis was on beliefs.
And that led you to predictive.
Yeah, predictive processing, exactly. Because then like you get this, once you go take beliefs as a lower level phenomena, then it's priors, there's an agent in the environment, and then they take information in, and there's a feedback loop between what they believe and what they perceive, and there's this sort of cross-updating, and that's why Bayesian models descriptively are appealing to me. And so that's kind of still what I work on theoretically. And then the stuff that I do in social cognition, no matter how low level it gets, the thing that I'm really interested in targeting is then the beliefs that are present.
So the thing with the predictive coding is it's a question to you. It's maybe a contradiction. It's like, so one of the things which I think is quite interesting in episodic memory is to think about it as a system which has no prior, because it's all about events you've never seen. It's all about something you've never seen. So it's not the same type of prior as something that you expect based on statistical regularity. And that's what allows you actually to encode these events as discrete events, because they are just unique. They are singular. Sometimes they repeat, you will always go to the shower, but the one you will remember, maybe it's the one where there was something happening, when someone called you, and you are in the shower, or ring the door and you had to get out. And like the things that repeat, you may only remember those which were particularly striking, and they are standing out because they are different. And what's the prior then?
So
that's the question.
Yeah. So this is a great point to kind of reflect on. So the reason why I think episodic memory requires the prior is for you to be able to notice that it's different. It means that it's violating a prior, right? So you have an expectation, which I would say is the prior, and then the violation of the expectation generates something like a gathering of new information. And if you're in the shower and the doorbell rings every time you're in the shower, the episodic memory gets deflated, right? Because it no longer has novelty. So I think that a crucial aspect of memory formation is this violation of expectation. So one of the things that I see as triggering memory formation, which was then, sort of part of that thesis, was that when there is the violation of expectation, it's novelty that necessitates encoding, right? And novelty that generates learning. Because like an encoding, and I think an episodic memory, you can take it as a learning episode, right? I remember it, if it's salient, there's something there and I extract some information from there. And then anytime, in order to trigger learning in an individual, they have to recognize the incongruence between what they believe and then what they're perceiving. And if they don't recognize the incongruence, then it doesn't really matter. If you change Sven's t-shirt color from yellow to red and I don't notice, it doesn't really matter. I didn't learn that he also has a red t-shirt, right? I might have been like, oh, wasn't his t-shirt always red? But if you call it out, or if I do notice, then I'm like, man, he has 2 t-shirts. You know, he has a wardrobe.
Yeah, makes total sense, and I think it's very striking that you say novelty is the thing that drives the encoding. Right, did I understand correctly?
Yeah, and in a sense, if you take novelty as violation of expectation.
Yeah. The difference between the prior and the observed.
Yes. Yep.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, but then like what I think is driving the novelty is kind of the novelty of the associations between things. So I guess like what's critical in what you say is that you had a ring, you had a shower, and what's new is like the ring happens while you are in the shower. So these 2 events they never happen at the same time. But you remember when they happen at the same time, also probably because there was some emotional discharge, some panic. But I can't go in that. I can't talk about emotion or this type of response. I don't really. I haven't thought about this through. It's more about like the novelty of the association, and that's kind of what we are investigating with the kids right now. First thing we looked, and that I looked at this afternoon, is how do they put 2 pieces of information together, and how do they track that these 2 things that they know in one association kind of happen to be now in a new association. And what happened is that it surprises them. So really, basic novelty effect. Literally, it's like how you interpret infants looking times in this situation. Novelty effect. It's they react to the new association, and it's rather cool because we see that in very different paradigm. And so you have 3 different tasks. Each tackle a type of association, whether it's between an item and a spatial location, or 2 items with each other, whether it's like an item within one context, for instance, this room and this cup. And at the moment they know these items, they will be surprised, and they look longer. They are surprised when the items swap. For instance, I mean, this ball is new to you, but imagine you know it.
Yeah.
Then you will see a new association between the room and the ball.
Yeah.
And while you both know the individual items, and there is no reason for you to be surprised by each of them individually, seeing them together will surprise you. So they do remember associations, arbitrary association, even after seeing the previous association, the familiar one, only one time. They do encode these things, which is quite cool. It was kind of suspected already, a few tasks, but like right now, seeing it in the different paradigm, it's quite striking. I think what's out of this is that it's consistently resulting in a novelty effect, and in infants looking longer at the new object, at the new piece of new association.
Yeah, I do that a lot. So, if you were to, or when you move on to some kind of new project, say you could build your own project, given all the experience you have and then the prior interest, like what does that look like?
On this question?
Man, it could even be broader, like because you started with sort of sociology and social cognition.
Yeah.
And then you moved into like really honing your skills as a good experimentalist, and having a wide range of experience with visual cognition, with FNIRS, imaging techniques. You know, what does that look like for you in terms of, you know, what would you look for, or what would you build a research question around?
Yeah, I mean, so part of the project we haven't really covered is how infants and their parents interact, and what's the input the children receive from the parents in terms of what the parents tell them, how they remember together things, how they might not agree, and then how does the child deal with that. I mean, what was most striking during these testings that I did at 18 months is that the kids become independent. They have like their representation of the self emerges, and they start to disobey, but sometimes they don't really know how to disobey, or they can't really. So they say no when you ask them to do something, but they will still do it. Or like they would, they can't necessarily handle their independence. They don't really know, I don't know, maybe they don't know, maybe it's blurry the line between themselves and the other ones. So there is a way in which identity starts. And it kind of reminded me of something that I saw a long time ago when I was working with Olivier, when we had like a setup where you had two kids who, on the one object that was interesting between the two kids, and they had to, you know, like play, and they would not play together. One kid will take an object, but not the other. And if you repeat the sequence 5 times, it will be always the same kid getting the toy. So there is some sort of dominance in first person that is established right there. Really the most brutal, literally brutal, sometimes
Finding,
you could, finding on mechanism. And, but it's brutal, but you know, like it's only babies. And what I found amazing, but it's just a blurry memory, is that sometimes parents would not feel comfortable about it. And they would start to say to the kid, can you give the toy? Can you let the other child play with it? And I love this because it's really about, like, I think there is something about prosociality in kids that we are kind of hoping to see, hoping to observe, and creating by, how to say, we are making that show that, but I'm not really convinced this is the case. So I'm thinking about like works by Hamlin and colleagues, and like they have, not saying that it's bad work. On the contrary, it's beautiful works, and their data are quite convincing. But I do think like there are some mechanisms of prosociality that need some input from the parents, and I do think that one major axis building society, such as morality, that you can call moral principles, are kind of transmitted through this channel, through the familial channel, the caretaker channel to the child at this precise moment, at these moments when the child starts to have independence. Because as part of a social contract, you need to have a contractor, 2 contractors, the parents and the child. And when the child starts to be aware, well, then you have to sign.
That's so true. Then you have to sign. So when you look at the emergence of prosociality, right? I think that the most efficient way to get it into a child's understanding early on, when a child is almost incentivized to be selfish, in that their caregiving is a process of prioritizing another agent, right? And so the whole process of early socialization of infant into early childhood is that you are the priority, you are the center of the universe.
Yeah.
And then the most efficient way to infuse prosociality into the child's thinking is by demonstrating it, right? By being explicit. And I think that there's also, if you get a circumstance where children are just engaging with each other, I think if there are enough of them, then maybe prosociality might emerge as a tactic that everybody uses with each other. And I think that I guess is one thing that gives me a little bit of solace, in that, of course, there are bullies and dominance hierarchies with kids as well. But I do think that when they're put in large enough groups and there is enough swaying power, there's some kind of fairness and deliberative capacity that somehow emerges.
Like a mutualistic theory of fairness, a la Beaumont?
Yeah, exactly. Because there's something like a public goods, you know, and there's something like a management of reputation, and there is a cost, an affective cost, an emotional cost to exclusion that I think is crucial.
Yeah.
And all these factors playing in together, with the fact that on top of that we have adults who kind of impose a prosociality, then I think that's why we get so much of this behavior in children and even adolescents and even sort of pre-teens, like early teenage years, before that sort of teenage, at least in some teenagers, sort of like extreme selfishness starts to emerge. But then it almost feels like once you enter the adult world, you realize that all of that is a myth, like in the adult world, where hierarchies are not just entrenched but enforced, right? And so you have to deal with this conflict in your 20s, especially of, well, this whole thing up to now has been a lie. You know, this promise of egalitarianism that I was raised in, reared in, is not actually there, right? And you can see that earlier, of course, but you're faced with it when you actually have to work and exist in a way that's separate, you know, at 18 or bigger, or larger, and that self-subsistence shows you that, and hopefully you have until 18 to live in that delusion. You know, hopefully you're not forced at 12, you know, to work, but
Well, I think part of the part of the illusion comes from us thinking that it will happen, that it will necessarily happen, that we are built with this in ourselves, that, like, you know, it will come as a law of the market. But I don't think that neoliberalism is the best example of fairness and of redistribution. So I mean, like, I think I don't want to go too much in opposition with what you say, because I'm totally 100% behind you in maybe thinking there is something about at least our species, we can put it like this, in terms of building spontaneously Nash equilibriums, like having like some economical systems that really implement a common goods. Probably, so there are probably limits to what's actually influencing the input from the parents. But I guess what interests me is actually not so much about like economical exchanges, but more about like really simple moral behaviors. And so when I was talking about the problem of identity, might be that sometimes we have major misunderstandings in multicultural situations. I don't want to say societies, but like situations in groups which have many different, like people from very different cultural backgrounds. We have a lot of misunderstanding which just come from whether you should say thank you, whether you should say hello, and whether you should, you know, like let someone go first, and how do you welcome someone who is entering your room and entering your home. You know, all these little things can create a lot of like annoyment. It's like, wow, these guys, they never wash their hand after they go to the toilet. You know, like white people. But yeah, I think there's a lot of things which are transmitted at this age, which are really to the level of saying hi, to say thank you, you say tak. Yeah.
That definitely makes sense. And this is there are contexts that we then like extract information from, and then are able to like pick up norms out of, and then we sort of help fuel these norms by our behavior, right? Does that track with what you're saying, or is it?
No, sorry.
So when you bring identity in the equation, you're saying that there is something that everybody brings into a particular context anyway, and that, like, how does that map onto the idea that there's something that is good for all of us if we all contribute? So like this idea of picking up trash, or, you know, why do you pay a cab driver if you could actually just open the door and run away? You know, there's something like a commitment to the society that you're in, and maybe it's merely, you know, people could do it because they get an affective reward from doing something nice, like picking up trash, but then other people could do it because they expect it to be paid forward to them, you know, so they do something because they expect that then that will help uphold the norm, which they also want to benefit from. This, you know, treat others the way you want to be treated kind of thing. So does that, how do those two things reconcile for you?
Well, like, I mean, it's really not satisfying, but you can just assume that what happens in the first year or age is different from what happens next, and then maybe you have like some motivation system that just works fine at a certain age in terms of computing, an idea of a common good, in terms of having an idea of getting a salary for some annoying job, like maybe all these things can start to play, but what happens at a younger age, it will be something more arbitrary, more like they don't know why they have to do that, but they just do it because they are asked to do it, and when they do it, then they get rewarded with smiles, with
I see. At the youngest age.
at the youngest age.
Yeah.
Or maybe that's already connecting what I was just saying in a way, because it's true that when the children are complying to what the parents are asking, they are paid with smiles, with even maybe their life gets easier. Parents are not yelling. They are more relaxed. They give them maybe some stuff in exchange.
Yeah, these are the rewards we were talking about.
Yeah.
Kind of before downstairs, which is like the rewards that you receive are multifaceted. So you can have a bunch of different types of rewards that you benefit from, and some can be sort of rewards that you get from other people through sharing, like that they also share with you, or it can be like smile and positive attitude, or it can be something where you have a longer term expectation that if you do something in the future, that will come back to you as a cleaner society. So that people might still be acting in a way which is, contingent upon what they think is better. And again, this might not be explicit. It could be that you get an affective reward. But either way, the kind of behavioral output is very similar. Whether you're sort of almost, psychopathically purely explicit incentive driven, or there's like a bunch of implicit incentives that you receive affective rewards from, the output might be very similar.
It could be, yeah, it could be. Somewhat I'm not satisfied with this. I feel like no, but
that's
it's
good.
Like,
that's good. Yeah.
It's not saying that it's easy. I feel it's not like necessarily the end of the story. In that I think there is a certain degree in which all these outcomes are opaque to the child. So you could think about over imitation as a mechanism that will drive the child to blindly follow what they are forced upon, what they are told to do, But or you could have like something which is not over imitation, which is a bit more cruel, and I think it speaks also to the relationship we entertain with power in general, in that there is a certain moment in our life where we are helpless and we can't do anything without the help of some higher omnipotent,
omniscient,
being, and
as the parent,
the caretaker, and it might shape us into like submission, and that's kind of what you see at 18 months, is like they start to not submit. But there is a difference between like being submission as accepting to bend towards someone, and submission just because you can't do anything and you don't even know you submit because you don't necessarily have a self. But you start in this state where things happen to you, and at some point you can start to say no, and you have to start noticing that when you say no, things are not happening the way they do, and so I guess that's how you start to free yourself. But at the same time, you free yourself from what's providing to your health, and that's very toxic from the beginning. But I'm a bit negative here. I think a bit nice. So you could find nicer ways to put that.
Yeah. I guess it's that the only way to exhibit agency as a very young child is against your own caregivers, right? And the caregivers at one point, like on one hand, are probably a bit annoyed, but on the other hand, are probably happy that you also have something like a preference.
Absolutely,
yeah.
Actually, that's also something. Now that you say that, you really observe, it's like the parents, when they have their kids who start to really oppose them, they are like, my child has a strong will.
Yeah.
And that's nice.
Yeah. And one parent might take ownership and say, I was the same.
Exactly,
Or, there's a pride element there,
Yeah, there is an element of pride, so it's not necessarily negative. But I think it speaks to something which is quite less funny, which is like, how do we deal every day with being in these states where we can't really do anything or feel like we are doing anything that we want to do ultimately.
Right, where like almost socially or politically inert at a large scale. Like we have very sort of small scale agency and impact, but at the large scale we don't have much agency at all. Yeah, I mean that's actually like a big part of the struggle, right? I think like that's what a lot of more revolutionary thinkers are railing against, the fact that most people are stripped of agency in the biggest ways, and then you get and that's not just in access to levers of more agency, of greater agency, but also then even epistemic access, like access to information being universal, and so there are sort of curtailments of the information that one might have access to in order to use that as a lever of power. Like I might, a classic example is like how I might, if I want to retain power, buy out every media outlet in a country, and now all of a sudden I've generated a context of epistemic injustice or epistemic inequality. And so I'm using the lack of epistemic access to the populace as a mechanism of greater power for me. And I think that this is like one of the many avenues through which somebody's agency can be curtailed without even them knowing or them having not much of a say in the matter.
Like obscurancy.
Yeah. I mean, you could obscure the truth. You could withhold the truth entirely. I mean, obviously, nobody has full access to their government's records, so nobody even has full access to what their company might be doing. Students don't necessarily have access to what their faculty meetings are saying. So you have this obfuscation, and the fact that the mechanism that is running the system you live in is opaque to you means that you have no agency. You don't even know what aspect of it to target. What is your complaint? Your complaint is the output, but that doesn't really help you change anything.
Yeah, I see. So if it's a question of knowledge, then it's kind of worry that academics have. But I don't know how much it generalizes to the rest of the population, and we can see that what's gaining the vote now, like the people who win the vote are not necessarily the ones who propose more transparency, but rather those who bring the shadow on truth. And but it doesn't mean that people who follow these leads are not having a claim about their own power. That makes sense to me. It's the question of power might be slightly different at a certain scale, and closer to what we were investigating actually with Olivier in terms of how infants split the resources. So I guess also that's why like a movement like the Communist Party was so powerful. It's that they really had like on the Marxist theory, it was very powerful because it was really about precisely how do you redistribute the wealth, the material goods. And now it's kind of obsolete since everyone got an iPhone and many goods. And well, it's not completely obsolete, but it's like it's not as striking as it used to be when people were literally dying.
Yes, exactly.
Massively because they had no food, no home, no whatever, lumpenproletariat history. But there is still something about like occupation of territory actually. So the way we were testing that, we had a toy, and we were seeing who's gonna hold the toy. But there is another way to investigate domination, which is just about space occupation. So there is nothing there necessarily. Nothing you can see. Maybe underground there is something. Maybe that place being next to the water opens some possibilities, and you should get this place. It's gonna open the world to you. So I think there is a lot about like land property. Maybe here you see the anarchist coming. I think that one of the major things that is problematic now is like we don't really have any control over the land. We can buy houses, that's all. But we can't necessarily directly influence public spaces. We can, and actually nice places exist all around the world where there is like a very free municipalities, on very free spaces like Christiania, where people just in Copenhagen, where people just come and you have a project. Can I build a tower here? And people are like, yeah, be careful. I mean, it's a bit simplistic, but I think that that's kind of where people are actually experiencing the power. It's like the power is not just about being able to change the whole society, but it's about being able to, you know, sell pears in the street right now. And you know, in France, you can't just go in the street and sell pears. You need the authorization from the super complicated administrative path. That's somehow what they kind of want to remove, these masses. You know, why are they bored about like the European Union? I think partly because it's a lot of annoying norms, path to follows in terms of ecology, in terms of property, in terms of this and this and this.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course. Okay. Like the fact that you don't, and again, I mean, one of the biggest problems is that we don't have, the public doesn't have ownership over their own natural resources, you know, and this is also one of the biggest problems, right? This is not something, whether it's air or water or also way more damaging the minerals, you know, because like one of the best things you can do with ownership over minerals is not extract them. Like in terms of saving the environment, not polluting your water, not polluting your air. So that you have this issue where, everything from land to water to air to everything under the land is effectively owned by not the people. Yes. And this is something which strips you of almost the entirety of your global agency and reduces it to whatever small bit of space that you can fight to afford. And that's really deranged. Yes. Exactly.
It goes hand in hand with not having access to the knowledge of these things being there, these resources being there. Like what you say is also, I think, an essential part of a problem.
Yeah, it's also things like if you don't know. So I recently watched a documentary. There was two filmmakers talking about the wastewater management in different countries, right? And how the wastewater management industry is dominated by 5 different companies. That's it, worldwide. Like if you have wastewater treatment in your country, it's 1 of 5 companies doing it. And how most of these companies, all of these companies, have lawsuits against them for not actually managing the wastewater. And so that means that wastewater sewage goes into clean drinking water, and it goes into water that's used for crops, right? And so all of a sudden, the stuff that our bodies cannot digest, and therefore we have mechanisms to safely remove it from our bodies, you know, like via our intestines, via our colons, that then goes into watering plants, and then plants absorb them, and then we eat them again. And then if you get them in high enough concentrations, your body's ability, your liver's ability, your kidney's ability to process them out starts to fail. And, you know, that can cause serious health problems over time. And so this information, both about the damages of this, right? And then about, so it comes in like multi-tiers. It's a vertical problem. It's the problem of not knowing that the wastewater management companies are not managing the wastewater. Then it's the problem of not knowing that plants are then taking up the harmful products. And then it's also not knowing that this is then harmful for you. And so this simple, like one small segment of the problem is not known to most of the public. And so what do you do with that? You know, if it's not even known, how do you even fight against it? You know? And then even if you know, what is the mechanism to fight against it? You know, this is the really difficult thing. And so the problem is that it's been so abstracted. I guess when I think about it, like from kids being told you should share, you know, to those same kids becoming adults, and then they don't realize they're being poisoned by the fruits and vegetables. It's like, what's this drastic difference in scale and you know, scope, but also like the drastic like phenomenological and material difference between these two things of sharing a toy or a cookie to not having unpoisonous produce.
Yeah. Well, that's a whole investigation to run. Actually, that's really One view of one way of seeing that is like, I mean, it's mostly anecdotic observation, but I remember like there was like, you know, parents are more or less eager to, and that's why I was talking about the parental input and how important it is. I think parents are more or less eager to pressure their kids into following moral rules, and it will be interesting to see how this distributes with later academic achievement, economic achievement, social status, how it aligns with the place where the people place themselves in the spectrum of different social types, typology. And I don't want to blame anyone. I don't want to say like this, but that's the investigation. How does this early happening enforcement of something bigger than oneself results in maybe leading toward relationships to something which is the common good. But when it comes about sharing information, it's maybe less about blind submission. It might be something else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. So, where else do your more philosophical or research interests overlap with your interests outside of academia, your more social interests? Like, it could be recreational, but it could also be like sort of ideological leanings or things like that.
I don't know. I don't know. It's like I don't really know. It's like it's been like when I have free time, I just travel around and do random things, party a lot, just get wasted. So it's more like it's not in relationship. It's in opposition. It's like at the same time, you know, I'm trying to have a good academic career, finding interesting stuff, you know, help with people, working hard and shit. Then when I'm not working, it's like fuck all that. Because in the end, nothing matters.
I mean, yeah, that we can definitely get behind.
I don't know if that's really not answering your question. But yeah, the relationship between my research interest and what I do the rest of my time is just like, in the end, fuck that shit. I don't. It's like even when I was even more radical at the end of my PhD, because you get tired after a PhD. You know, takes a toll, and it was really like. Classic things like what I found is not helping anything, and anyways, why would we even care about helping society? It's like, what does it matter? Why should I even care about ecology? Because like obviously like it's not going to change anything if I change something, and it's not going to change anything if we all change something, because ultimately at some point we're all gonna die. So you see, it's like, yeah.
But the fatalism there is like in conflict for me with your view of almost the preciousness of life.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you reconcile these two things?
By walking my ass when I'm not traveling. I know it's taking most of the time. I had 1 month of going crazy for 1 year, but I have 11 months on walking my ass. Because in then, you know, like when you grow older, and especially I guess when you see kids, when you see how like incredible is life, and how like, how to say, I mean, there are two things which I guess drive toward trying to achieve something in science and in life, something positive. Is like how obvious it is that life is beautiful when you observe kids, and how like curious they are, how like rapid they are to learn, how willing they are to please you, and also to have good lives, and, you know, simple things, and something you can't even say. Like, I mean, it's not even a matter of reasoning. There is nothing to say about a kid being a wonder. You see a kid, it's a wonder, and that's what sacredness is about. It's about, I believe, like, as Pascal say, you have to knee down to start to believe. And what makes you knee is obviously that you have to pick up the child from doing shit. That's one way. And the other way is statistics. You have something wonderful like the Gaussian like curve. You have something like the central limit theorem that shows that there is actually order in the world.
Yeah.
Like somehow, when you have 50% chance and you throw ball around, then you will arrive with 50% of the balls there, 50% there. So there is something in the world which happens to make sense. So maybe we should try to figure what it is in everything we can find it in.
Yeah.
It's good. Nothing to. It's not about sacredness, but you know.
Yeah. So there are two threads there, and maybe we'll have to kind of, if you're interested, talk about this in a different episode. But there are two threads that I think are interesting. One is about the beauty of life itself, and the fact that life has emerged, the fact that life is a self-organizing system of information, generates more information upon itself, is in itself beautiful information, like as an informational aesthetic, even beyond the fact that you get a child out of it and a flower out of it and the smell of a rose out of it, you know. But then you have something that is what contains that, right? Which is the broader, almost statistical. I don't want to say regularity because we're discovering the regularities, right? But like, you know, at least for shorthand, the statistical regularity of the universe itself, like of the fact that what is seems to be contained by the limits of what can be, if that makes sense. The fact that it's not arbitrary what exists because there's some kind of bounds on what's possible. And those bounds, we can call them laws of the universe, which is probably like the easiest thing to default to. You have physical laws, and you have information emerging from the physical laws. The physical laws are information themselves. Then you have relationships with the information. And out of all of the theoretically possible things, only a small number are probable, and even a smaller subset of those are what is, right? And so that discovery of what is, the Gaussian distribution, this really nice curve of likelihoods, the fact that there's some degree of as much randomness as there is at some point when you engage. If there's a binary outcome, it's going to be one or the other, you know?
Yeah.
And if you keep testing something, it's usually one or the other. And that's pretty phenomenal, you know? Except, you know, when you get to like chirality of molecules, and they seem to mostly be left-handed. Like other than that, you know, you get these really interesting, which again is, you know, just one of the, you know, tangents through which something is selected, gathered momentum, and then just carried forward. But yeah, those two things are super interesting, and I think you see, like, deeply feel also the same beauty in things.
I'm glad to know it resonates with you.
Yeah,
It's precious. Like.
Yeah. I think that's what we found in each other earlier on. But is there anything else that you want to throw into this?
No, not
conversation?
Particularly. We can start playing if you want.
We can start playing with things.
Yeah. You know this one?
No?
Come on, you had to have played with that. Maybe you don't remember.
Yeah, no, I know this.